Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam rasulillah. Firstly, assalamu alaikum. Thank you for joining us on a very interesting topic. So, The Forbidden Prophecies. This is a book that we've recently published, and this is a very powerful, we believe, argument for the prophethood, the proof of prophethood, of the claims that are made in the Quran and the Sunnah. We believe that the prophecies are very, very powerful. Now, before I get down to that, I want to speak about something, right? So, in the Western world, in the secular world, in the world where you believe in material and matter and everything is physical, psychics are actually doing really well. They're actually doing really well. So if you go down to New York, London, Tokyo, Shanghai, Brazil, whatever, you're going to come across these psychics. You're going to come across these people who are going to speak about, I can tell you the future, I can tell you who you're going to get, if you want to get married to somebody, do you want someone to like you? So there's this fascination with the unseen. There's this fascination with the unseen. And this fascination hasn't gone away, although religion to a large extent has died within the Western world. So this particular type of interest in what people just want to know about the future, this interest has not actually gone away. So from the ancient times, as you can see there, from the times of the ancient Mayans to the modern day occult movements that we have this fascination with the unseen, and this is timeless. This is not something which you can say, okay, so since human beings started to use science and reason and mathematics and logic, that these things go away. In fact, something quite interesting, during the Victorian times, what we know now today as Darwin's theory, this was known as Darwin and Wallace's theory. Darwin and Wallace. However, over time, Wallace was whitewashed from history and it just became Darwin's theory. Why that's the case is because he moved away. He didn't believe natural selection could be applied to human beings. But there's also something else very interesting about Wallace. He became involved in spiritualism. Although he was a scientist, although he was not into traditional religions, it was so attractive that he started getting involved in those types of things. So this type of behavior is contagious. Gave that away earlier. Netflix, right? So recently we had Muslims going crazy over this particular film, because this is about end time eschatology, the Islamic science of the end of times. So we have this fascination with this. In fact, what you find is, even if you go to a place like Japan, which is very much away from religion, they don't have this traditional belief in religion anymore. In a place like Japan, Walaikum Salam, they still have this thing about numbers, this thing about, something being unlucky or something being, they have this unseen sort of, not paranoia, but this obsession with the unseen. And these things are obviously, when Netflix, when movies like, the shows like this, when they come to, the front, it reignites something within us that we already have. We already have this sort of desire to want to know about the unseen and want to know about end-time eschatology and whatnot. So, what I want to speak about is that this knowledge is not superficial knowledge. This knowledge that we're going to gain now, in the next 40 minutes, whatever, this is not superficial knowledge. A friend of mine who used to be a very militant atheist, they were a Christian, then they became a very militant atheist for a number of years. And then they eventually came around to believing in God. Not believing in religion, but believing in God. And then they became Muslim. And one of the things they said about Islam is that when they read the end time prophecies in Islam, it felt like that. It felt like a newspaper from the future. Yeah, burning news, something from the future. And that was, I think, a really powerful description that, look, inshallah, in this short period of time, everything that we're going to learn, this will go to show conclusively, for anybody that's sincere, that this man, the Prophet, peace be upon him, this man is a true messenger of Allah. Before we do that, we need to set a criteria about how do we recognize a person who claims to have knowledge of the unseen from somebody that we do believe in as Muslims, that is the Prophet, peace be upon him. How do we how do we distinguish the Prophet from all of those other figures? So this is a very difficult criteria to match, right? This criteria is very difficult. It's like pushing a boulder up a mountain which is just on an incline. Why is that? Because we want these criteria to be fulfilled. And as we're going to see, these are quite tough. Now, in the book which I mentioned at the beginning, The Forbidden Prophecies, it goes through this in a lot more detail. We're going to do a sort of quick roller coaster tour of this. But just look at these concepts. First, it has to be risky, right? So if I say to you guys, next year, you're going to get ill. It's not really risky, is it? Next year, you may or may not get married. What's wrong with that? Not only is that not risky, that's actually unfalsifiable. You can't actually test that. If I say this person may or may not get married, doesn't really make any sense. It has to be accurate. It has to be something concrete. So it can't be, and you get this when you read horoscopes. Of course, we don't read horoscopes as Muslims, but next year, your financial situation will be such that you will be pleased, but not exactly pleased, but you may also have issues. Those sort of things are unfalsifiable. They're too vague. It also needs to be numerous. So if you happen to make, and as we're going to see later on, one of the claimants, he made lots of prophecies. If you make lots of endless prophecies, and one of them turns out to be true, that's not really evidence, because you could have been right by sheer coincidence. So it needs to be numerous, it needs to be accurate, it needs to be consistently shown to be true. It also needs to be in chronological order. So if I say, what's going to happen is event A, then event B. But if event B happens before A, then that's not really the prophecy being fulfilled. It needs to be in a chronological order. It needs to be preserved. So for example, here we have a man who made a prophecy and it came true. When did it come true? 100 years ago. When did the man live? 200 years ago. So we need to have that prophecy written at least 200 years ago, or else it could have been re-engineered. And lastly, this is very important, we need to look at the agenda, the character and integrity of the person making the claim. Okay, anyone heard of Taoism? Anyone heard of Taoism? Not really. However, Taoists, they had their scripture going back roughly to the 5th century. They were a very evangelical religion. They had this book called the Divine Incantations. And they believed they were going to be aided by celestial ghost troops, which for the people that are going to uphold Taoistic teachings. Their du'at, you can call them, their evangelicals, they were supposed to convert the unenlightened. They were going to get protection, they were going to get supernatural protection for their priests and their temples. Here's the interesting point. The rejectors of Taoism, they were going to die of horrible diseases. This is one of their claims. And that Taoism was going to prevail. Taoism as a religion was going to prevail. So remember, this is the scripture from the 5th century. Now, let's look at what basically happened, right? So you had the Tang dynasty, in which the Taoist religion got state support, which you do get state supporting religions. In the Song dynasty, interesting name, you got state support. However, in the Yuan dynasty, hopefully I'm saying that right, you started to have some setbacks of Taoism. Their books were burnt and stuff. Then during the Qing dynasty, there was widespread rejection of Taoism, and there's rise of Confucianism. And later on in the early 20th century, you had the rise of Christianity in China. Christianity is going to be one of the largest populations of Christians in the world is going to be China in the next couple of decades, right? And then during, of course, the People's Republic of China, and later on the China that we have today, the official religion is what?
Secularism.
State atheism. State atheism. So Taoism clearly hasn't prevailed. Those ghost troops didn't come and strike down Mao and all the rest of the heathens and the infidels with diseases. Okay, now let's go to Vedic astrologers, Hindu astrologers. Now, sometimes, and we're here in Pakistan, whenever we think of Hindus, we think, oh, those people, they go to their astrologers. However, what's interesting about Hindu astrologers is not only Hindus who go there. Muslims also go to Hindu astrologers. Christians also go to Hindu astrologers. In fact, where I used to live in London, northwest London, Harlesden, our area was mostly an Afro-Caribbean type area. And some Portuguese, some Polish and others. In that area, of course, it's quite expensive to open up a shop. Recently, not too long ago, there was a Hindu astrologer who opened up his place, and then other people, non-Hindus, were basically going to him. So this is very, very popular stuff. Okay. Here's some interesting facts. Vedic astrology is officially recognized by the Indian government as a science, right? The University Grants Commission, I'm not sure if there's an equivalent in Pakistan, whatever name that is, they actually said this: there is an urgent need to rejuvenate the science of Vedic astrology in India, to allow this scientific knowledge to reach the society at large and provide opportunities to get this important science even exported to the world. Right? So they clearly state-sanctioned astrology, right? And again, people's fascination, and people spend a lot of money on astrology, right? So they have this absolute fascination with them. Now, what happened was some people in India weren't happy with this. So what they did is the University Grants Commission was supporting Vedic astrology, and some people, obviously, they said this is not science. So they went to the High Court to try and block the University Grants Commission. And what they said in return is, the Mumbai High Commission said this, that basically they do not cover astrology and related sciences. Astrology is a trusted science that has been practiced for over 4,000 years. This is not a random statement. This is actually the Mumbai High Court. So there is a lot of trust in Vedic astrology till today. However, a physicist from India, Jayant Narlikar, I don't know how I'm pronouncing that, he wanted to do a scientific experiment to show that this is not science. So what he did is this is really funny actually. 200 children, 100 children who are intelligent, 100 children which were intellectually disabled, right? And he took their dates, obviously, and these Vedic astrologers, they go by dates and they come up with their stuff. He used 27 astrologers with an average of 14 years of experience. 14 years of experience amongst, each person had about average of 14 years. Now here's the thing, you had 200 children, 100 intelligent, 100 that were not intelligent, they were intellectually disabled. I don't know what that means, but that's what it says. And by pure throwing the dice, you would get a result of 50%. They could be right 50% of the time. However, the success rate was 43%. They failed by someone who would have just done pure guesswork. So this type of Vedic astrology is something which, if you try and scrutinize it, you find out that it's basically nonsense. However, I'm going to mention some things about, our belief as Muslims and jinns that come and, they can mix 100 lies with the truth and whatnot. That is important, because there is a case can be made that there is a reason why people keep going back to astrologers from an Islamic perspective. Okay, Nostradamus. How many people heard of Nostradamus here? Okay. Nostradamus was like a factory of prophecies. He made prophecies continuously, and he made prophecies for the next 10 centuries. That's how confident he was. For the next 10 centuries, all the way to the year 3797. Quite precise, yeah? Prophecies all the way until then. What's interesting is Nostradamus was loved and was somebody that was really looked up to. So people started doing tafsir of his actual prophecies. And his prophecies were so popular that since 1775, remember he's from the 16th century, right? Since 1775, at least one book on Nostradamus has been published every 20 years, right? So somebody's come up and said, this is my understanding, my tafsir of Nostradamus, right? This is my take on what he's saying. And since 1940, it's actually been one book, 1840, it's been one book every decade. One book every decade. So he's definitely the most popular historically. People have done whole explanations on his prophecies. Okay. However, if you look at his prophecies, and as Muslims, we know we shouldn't be going to these types of people, but from a purely analytical point of view, what you find is something like this. These are two different prophecies which I put up here. To support the great troubled cape, the Reds will march in order to clarify it. A family will be almost overcome by death. The red ones will knock down the red one. Could you be more vague? I don't understand what that is saying. However, somebody with a bit of imagination can say red. Right, the Reds are going to take on the red. Who was red? Oh, the Soviet Union, they were red. Oh, Soviet Union collapsed. One of the theories why it's collapsed is internal strife, which is red against red. Oh, do you see? It's just so vague, anyone could come up with it. Look at another prophecy. The great swarm of bees will arise, such that one will not know whence they came. By night the ambush, the sentinel under the vine, city delivered by 5 babblers, not naked. Right, getting explicit there, right? I don't understand. I really don't understand what he's trying to say. However, that could mean many different things to many different people. Okay, so Nostradamus is vague, and where he's vague, you can't say he's right, you can't say he's wrong, you can't say anything because he's purely vague. However, when he is precise, he's wrong. Not every single time, because some of the years, like he's got predictions in the future, but what we can test. Here's what he says. In the year 1999, most of you I think were familiar with everybody going crazy at that time, right? In the 7th month, right, that's quite precise, from the sky will come the great king of terror, bringing back to life the great king of the Mongols. Before and after, Mars to reign by good fortune. Right, then it goes into vagueness, right? We don't understand the last bit, but we do understand something terrible is going to happen in the year 1999. People started actually panicking. If you actually look at different countries at the time, people started panicking. Some people thought the great terror in the sky, nuclear weapons. Other people thought Dajjal, Antichrist, right? 1999 came, and what happened in 1999? Nobody knows, right? It's irrelevant. It's nothing important actually happened. Mother Shipton, very interesting character. Mother Shipton, let's look at one of the predictions. Cardinal Wolsey will see the town of York from a distance, but never actually set foot in it. The confirmation in 1530, Cardinal Wolsey, who was a real person, he did actually see the town of York, and before he could enter it, before he traveled there, he received a message from the king, and then he had to come back to London, and on the way he died. So this is a precise prediction which was confirmed. So what's going on here? Well, the issue was, this is a historical prediction which was confirmed historically. But the problem was this. The confirmation of what happened was 1530, and the earliest written record of Mother Shipton, who's known as the English Nostradamus, the earliest written record was 1641. So the prediction was, that's the earliest record we have is later. So it's not really a prediction because it's reverse engineered at best. Joseph Smith, anyone heard of Joseph Smith? Joseph Smith, okay, Joseph Smith. Let's look at this prediction. And by the way, I've chosen these predictions to show the earlier criteria and how certain things are failing, right? Look at what he says. And remember, he's saying this he had a very short life, and he's saying this between 1805 and 1844. That's when he was born and died, right? Verily thus saith the Lord concerning the wars that will shortly come to pass, beginning at the rebellion of South Carolina, which will eventually terminate in the death and misery of many souls. And the time will come that war will be pronounced upon all nations, beginning at this place, for behold, the southern states shall be divided against the northern states. Let me just tell you guys how important this is. He's writing this before the American Civil War. The American Civil War happened after his prediction. You can prove his prediction came before the American Civil War. Go back to the previous slide, please. Yes, this one. Look what he says. South Carolina is where the rebellion is going to begin, and the North is then going to fight the South. So he's not only telling you a civil war is coming. Next slide, please. He's telling you it's going to begin in South Carolina, and then it's going to be North versus South, and many people are going to perish. Anyone know where the American Civil War started? South Carolina. And it was the North versus the South. So this prediction was confirmed. And Joseph Smith and his followers, Joseph Smith made the prediction. He died before it was fulfilled. And his followers were using this as evidence that he is a true prophet of God. Okay? And he's the founder of Mormonism. Right? Next slide, please. However, here's the problem with his prediction. Congressman John Randolph, who didn't claim to be a prophet, in 1807, he made the same prediction. American statesman John Calhoun stated in 1847 the very same thing, that North is going to fight against the South. Here's another fact. Before these two guys, they basically said that the North is going to fight against the South. Why? Because that was a political matter that was boiling over that any perceptive mind would have actually said. So we have statements going back before Joseph Smith that say the North is going to fight the South. When Joseph Smith made the prediction, before he made it, in 1832, South Carolina, where he said the rebellion is going to start, openly declared their support for rebelling against the federal regulation that went against their interests. It was entirely predictable. Hence, you had people before Joseph Smith actually saying it. And Joseph Smith, let's look at his prediction. Although his prediction was very predictable, he overstepped himself. He overreached himself. Why? Because Mormons at that time, they would have said, look, the North is fighting the South, and it started in South Carolina. Therefore, Joseph Smith's a true prophet. But let's look at his entire prophecy. He not only said the North is going to fight the South and it's going to start in South Carolina, he said other nations are going to get involved, including Great Britain, until there is an entire nation against nation, all-out war, a world war. That never happened at all. So he was right in terms of what was predictable, and he was wrong in terms of what was unpredictable. And that actually never took place. Next slide, please. Okay, this scary looking person, right? I actually I knew about him from before, but I was researching him this morning and I was actually disgusted. He's one of the worst figures I have studied in my life, right? And you can tell by that picture, he's not exactly pleasant. Aleister Crowley, 20th century, renowned in the 20th century. He was dubbed the wickedest man in the world by the British media. Why? Because of his very liberal ideas on sex and drugs. In fact, his liberal ideas today, even today in our liberal society, they would be frowned upon, right? He had blasphemous writings against traditional religions. He used to ridicule them. He went to Egypt and he claimed there was a supernatural entity called Awis, which gave him a book of law, right? And then he founded a religion called Thelema, which is very popular amongst the occult movement till today. And his moral rule was this: do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Basically, like, just do it. Yeah, just do what you want. He had really crazy beliefs about sexual magic, occult, and all this type of stuff. He's actually named as one of the most, I think 70 something in terms of the most popular British people, something like this, right? So he's a very influential figure. Walaikum salam. So Aleister Crowley, what's very important about him is this. He made a lot of predictions, and he made obviously predictions that we can show today are completely false. That these predictions don't make any sense at all. However, something happened which made his followers super excited, right? And they were speaking about this. He makes this prophecy, and remember, he was at the beginning of the 20th century, and he bought this house in Scotland, and he made this prophecy. But your holy place shall be untouched through the centuries. He's speaking by himself. But he claimed the book of law was not his book, but was revealed to him. Yeah? But your holy place shall be untouched throughout the centuries. Though with fire and sword it will be burnt down and shattered, yet an invisible house there standeth, and shall stand until the fall of the great equinox, right? So basically he's making a prediction here that my holy place, which according to him, and we have records of this, he says his holy place is Boleskine House in the Scottish Highlands, right, near the Loch Ness, right? He says it's going to be burnt down, but then an invisible house is going to be there, and it's going to remain till some other event happens. In this is a BBC article. Very, very recently, the house basically burnt down. That house burnt down, and obviously the people, occultist type people, they were very influenced by this. However, there's a clear problem. Number one, this could be a self-fulfilling prophecy. Self-fulfilling prophecy. Very easy. It's very particular. Two, what's the chances of a house catching fire, right? If you say something like, in the future, my house will survive for some maybe centuries, but then there'll be a fire. Well, come on, everybody has had, there's a fire in the street, there's this going on, there's that going on, especially at the time that he was alive, there was a lot more of this going on. So a complete prediction, something not really risky, something that you can reverse engineer, or you can not reverse engineer, you can actually self-fulfill. So not something that we can actually take as a prophecy. So when we look at the objective criteria, risky, accurate, concrete, unpredictable, numerous, chronological order, falsifiable, consistent rewrite, preservation. Aleister Crowley fails on most accounts, but the account that he fails on, which we should highlight, is his character, his integrity, and his agenda, right? Because he was, as a person, a very sick character, right, in terms of his depraved ideas on drugs, on sex, and on other sorts of issues. So according to the objective criteria, from the time of the ancient Mayans to Aleister Crowley, you find this failure. You find this consistent failure to reach this objective standard. Now we start off on a quick sort of journey about the Prophet ﷺ, right? He claimed he was a true messenger of God. And what we find is, according to the criteria which I mentioned previously, if you go back one slide, he makes predictions which we can actually test in this way. In fact, what you will not really find is that not only are his predictions within this matrix, they actually surpass this matrix as well. Why? Because there's one aspect which I didn't put in this criteria, which you can actually apply to the other, which I didn't actually apply to the other people, which is counterfactuals. Sometimes the Prophet ﷺ will say something and then say something else, and these two things seem to contradict, yet they both actually happened. Because it seems one will contradict the other, but that doesn't actually happen. And I didn't even put that as a criteria for the other people, but for the Prophet ﷺ, that even goes through. Next slide, please. He spoke about the defeat of Rome and Persia. what we have is we have a narration from him. During the Battle of Khandaq, there was a massive rock and the Sahaba couldn't break the rock. So they called the Prophet ﷺ, who was physically very strong, and he came and he struck the rock. And what did he tell the Sahaba? He said, you're going to conquer Syria, you're going to conquer Persia, you are going to conquer Yemen. He made it very explicitly clear. And this is at the time when the Muslims were just in Medina and they were surrounded by 10,000 of their army. And there was no other Muslims in Arabia. He didn't tell them you're going to win against these 10,000. He said you're going to win against Rome and Persia, which is incredible when you think about it. Because the Munafiqs, they were saying what? They weren't even calling Medina, Medina. They were calling Yathrib. They were having bad thoughts about Allah. They were the ones who were actually saying, this man talks about victory when we cannot go to the toilet without arrows being shot at us. So clearly, if you look at it from a historical point of view, we're not even at this stage where you have Rome and you have Persia and you have the time of the Caliphate where you have a strong central state. No, all of Islam was in one city and the Prophet ﷺ said this. Yet this is exactly what happened. The Muslims, after he died, they conquered Rome, they conquered Persia, they conquered the areas of Syria and Yemen, which were under Roman control, and they conquered Persia. So they beat them all. Now, what's interesting is what a historian, Barnbury Rogerson, says about this astonishing event. And there's other people who've spoken about this event as well. But he just says these words which I just love, right? He says, these two were superpowers, Russia and the United States. They were superpowers. And he said the equivalent today and the equivalent at that time, if you want to think about it, is imagine today Eskimos rise up and they take on Russia and they take on USA. That's how significant the Sahaba and their victories against Rome and Persia was. It was completely unpredictable. And there's actually a lot of historical evidence for of historians speaking about this very difficult event to explain in terms of material resources, right? Another time a man came up to the Prophet ﷺ and said, tell me about the hour. The Prophet said, the one asked knows no more of it than the one asking. Then the man said, tell me about its signs. And the Prophet said, that you see the barefooted, unclothed herdsmen competing in the construction of tall buildings. Right? Very explicitly clear, falsifiable, concrete, accurate, risky. Risky. Why is it risky? Because who had a tradition of building tall buildings? The Hagia Sophia, which is in Istanbul, this was built before this prophecy. And this is an extravagant tall building. The Romans had tall buildings, the Persians had tall buildings, the Indians had tall buildings, the Chinese had tall buildings. The Mayans had tall buildings. The Prophet ﷺ could have said, they are going to compete with each other with tall buildings. However, he didn't say them. He actually pointed towards a certain type of Arab, the Bedouin Arabs. Now, from the history of the Arabs, there have been two types of Arabs. They are city Arabs and they are Bedouin Arabs. What type of Arab was the Prophet ﷺ? Nope, he was a city Arab. The Bedouin Arabs were the people of the desert. They were the people of the desert. They had goats and milk and they had these things. They didn't have the sophisticated language and not language, but the sophistication of the city life. However, I just want you to understand something. The Muslims came and they set up the first state, right? As we call them, the rightly guided Khalifas. And then you had the Umayyads, then you had the Abbasids, then you had the Ottomans, and obviously in this part of the world you had the Mughals. You had massive Islamic civilizations. Massive Islamic civilizations. The Bedouin Arabs were doing the exact same thing during these great times of scientific achievement and economic and political achievement that they were doing before the Prophet ﷺ. They were milking camels, drinking camel's milk, and just herding sheep and camels. The Arabs at the golden age, when they were looking into the deep mysteries of the universe, these people were still using the feces of camel as fuel, right? That's what these people were doing. Next slide, please. This is actually a photo from the early 20th century of these Bedouin Arabs. Early 20th century, right? Now, the prophecy is so clear that hundreds of years ago, Imam Nawawi says this, and remember, he's from the 13th century, right? He said, the people of the desert and their like are the people of need and poverty. Everybody knows that. A time will come in the world when the world will be laid open for them until they compete with each other in the construction of tall buildings, and Allah knows best. Imam Qurtubi, again in the 13th century, 700 years ago, 800 years ago, he says this: what is meant here is the prediction of a reversal in society whereby the people of the desert will take over the construction of affairs and rule every region by force. They will become extremely rich. They will become extremely rich, and their primary concern will be to erect tall buildings and take pride in them. So the Prophet ﷺ is talking about a group of people who didn't even have houses. Remember, the Bedouin did not even have houses, right? And he's saying they are going to compete with each other with tall buildings. Now, what's interesting about this prophecy as well is the Prophet ﷺ, actually go back 2 slides, please. The Prophet ﷺ, and in the Quran, it's not good to have extravagant tall buildings. In fact, the Prophet's own mosque, when it became too big for the people worshipping there, the Sahaba wanted to build it, extend it, and the Prophet didn't want that. In the Quran, Allah says, do you build on every high a monument? Vain is what you do, and you make strong fortresses as if you will live you'd live forever. So if it was a prophecy which the Prophet ﷺ wanted to come true, he would have said it about the city Arabs, which were the Sahaba, and told them, and it would have been his sunnah to build tall buildings. But he never did that. He didn't tell people to do that. In fact, it was the opposite. Go back 2 slides. Okay, this is Sir Wilfrid Theiserger. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Sounds German. As recently as the 1940s, and he just passed away just 2003. That's why you see this picture, which is colored. He's writing about these people in the early 20th century. And he basically says this: as I listened through once again how precarious was the existence of the Bedou, their way of life naturally made them fatalists. So much was beyond their control. It was impossible for them to provide for a morrow when everything depended on a chance fall of rain, or when raiders, sickness, or any one of 100 chance events happened to make them destitute or end their lives. They did what they did, and no people were more self-reliant. But if things went wrong, they accepted it as their fate without bitterness and with dignity as the will of God. Now if you look up his works, he describes them, and they are exactly like the Prophet ﷺ described them during his lifetime, right? However, today the tallest buildings in the world, in terms of percentage-wise where they're built, is in the Middle East, is in the areas of the Bedouin Arabs. The tallest building in the world is where? Dubai. And what's it called? Burj Khalifa. Burj Khalifa. When Burj Khalifa was being built or completed or whatever, I think even before it was actually completed, the Kingdom Tower, a random family, a rival family in Saudi Arabia, they said, we want to build a taller building, which is going to be 1,000 meters. And this vain competing with each other is something that you find amongst them. What's interesting is that they discovered the black oil, the gold, which was something that made them go from overnight from camels to Cadillacs. Instantly. Now, who was ruling this area before the Bedouins that we have today? Who's ruling this area?
Which one? Which area?
The Middle East. Turks. When did the Turkish Empire, the Ottomans, collapse? And how long were they running for? The Ottomans. 600 years. Oil was discovered which made them super rich after the collapse of the Ottomans. If that oil was discovered when the Ottoman Empire was still there, do you think the Bedouin Arabs would have been building these tall buildings? Because they wouldn't have had the money. In fact, what we know from the Ottoman history is that they were great administrators and they wouldn't have built vain buildings like this. They actually, they had a complete different paradigm. Yeah, these people overnight, they went from being extremely poor to extremely rich, which is why you find them spending a huge amount of money, and for them, money doesn't mean anything. You literally have people alive today who are billionaires whose ancestors, just going back 2 or 3 generations, had nothing but camels and milk and goat and dates. Right? And what you find is so many prophecies, so many beautiful prophecies where the Prophet ﷺ is telling us things direct, clear, falsifiable, accurate, to the T. Now, I can go on and on about prophecies, right? And, there's a lot better lectures than what you're going to find right now on this particular topic. Just wanted to mention one last one before we carry on. The Prophet ﷺ said, ahead of the hour, people will only greet those whom they know. Trade will become so widespread that a woman will help her husband in his trade. Ties of kingship will be severed. Can anyone help me read that? Ties of kingship will be severed. People will bear false witness and conceal true testimony, and the pen will prevail. Here the Prophet ﷺ talking about trade, severing of ties, the increase of literacy, right, with the pen prevailing. We could do a whole dars, a whole clear explanation of this hadith and just how it fits with the world today. But what I want to say next may sound a bit controversial to you. All of this is not enough. If I give you 50 prophecies which were confirmed, that's not enough. How many prophecies do we need to meet that criteria? Anyone have a guess? Is 50 enough? 50 prophecies which were confirmed and came true. Is 50 enough? What about 100? 1,000? What if I was to tell you, if there was 1,000,000 prophecies of the Prophet ﷺ where he said things which were risky, unpredictable, falsifiable, chronological order, and they were confirmed, what if I was to tell you 1,000,000 of them is not enough? Would you say I'm right or wrong? Wrong. You have show of hands, right or wrong? Raise your hand if you think I'm wrong. If 1,000,000 prophecies is not enough. Okay. If we think miracles, prophecies are enough, we should all follow Dajjal. Why? Because he's going to give you, in front of your very eyes, things that supposedly look dead come back to life. He's going to command the sky to rain and it's going to look like it's raining. He is going to do things which is going to confuse the hell out of you. Right? Isa alayhi salam, whatever he did with Allah's permission. Dajjal is going to claim he's doing it by himself. So why are we not going to follow Dajjal? Because he's doing miracles, and we also have the miracles of the Prophet, but he's doing miracles. What's the difference? The difference is the theology. What is his theology? Who's God? He's God. The theology of the Prophet ﷺ is that Allah is worthy of worship. It doesn't matter if a man comes like him and says, here's a miracle, here's a prediction, here's this. If the fundamental theology is false, we don't care if it's 1,000,000 miracles. So we will believe in the Prophet ﷺ even if he didn't come with any prophecies because of his theology. But if he comes with prophecies, they only add to the proof of prophethood. What's interesting in the world today is that the new atheist movement, this liberal, atheistic, humanistic movement which is sweeping the Western world, they are priming the world to accept, without them understanding what they're doing, the message of the person on the previous slide. Him. Why? Because what is their message? Firstly, rejection. Rejection of who? Rejection of God and religions. 2, what's their other message? Materialism. What's Dajjal's main thing? Who's going to be attracted to him? People who are affected by materialism. And materialism is fueled by Darwinism, atheism, feminism, liberalism, humanism. These ideas, they're about progress being better. Whenever they talk about why the Western world is supposedly better, when they make the arguments about the Western world, and of course we're not saying East versus West and clash of civilization, anything like that. What we're saying is that their argument is, look at us, look at the technology we have, look at the money we have, right? So fueling materialism, rejecting God, rejecting religions, right? Making the blasphemous, making the sacred unsacred, right? Making it so it is blasphemy in the sense of Aleister Crowley, normalizing swearing at God. Or like, for example, one of the blasphemous things which was out maybe 30 years ago was The Life of Brian, right? In which they were mocking Jesus. They were mocking Isa alayhi salam. This types of normalizing this type of bad insults towards God and His Messenger. Whether it's Islam, Christianity, Judaism, doesn't matter. This is what they do. The third thing is, apart from rejection of God and rejecting the messengers and materialism, the third unholy trinity here is their focus on empiricism. We will only see what we believe. We will only believe something we can see. We want the miracle now. We don't want to believe, oh God, we can't see God. I want to see God. This unholy trinity of rejection of traditional belief in God, increase in materialism, which is the fodder that Dajjal needs to attract people, and the focus on empiricism. If they want a physical God, that's what Dajjal's going to be. And if you look at Surah Kahf, that we're supposed to read in protection for the Dajjal, look at the messages in that surah. One of the messages, in fact, many of the messages, they exactly correlate with a counter to the new atheist sort of priming. Because why? One of the messages in this surah is materialism. Is it not? The man with the garden, right? One of the messages is to believe in the unseen, which is the story of the people of the cave, which is something they deny. And also, one of the things here is about the man who he believes in his physical resources more than Allah. And he says, I do not think the day of judgment will come. Again, empiricism. So what you find is rejection, which I spoke about, materialism and empiricism. All three of these things are denied explicitly in this surah. Because this surah, when we're supposed to recite it in protection for the Dajjalic worldview for Dajjal, it's the meaning. It's not just the sounds, it's the meaning. And the meaning is, interestingly enough, what the new atheist movement is actually priming the world towards. So I just want to end upon this slide. It's not, like I mentioned, it's not enough for the Prophet ﷺ to come with those prophecies. It's not enough. Yeah? The Prophet comes and he says, this will happen in the future, that will happen in the future, and it happened. We don't go by miracles alone. We need to look at the character. Now I want to end upon this thing. A few months ago, here in Pakistan, February 2019, when you had the tension between India and Pakistan, right? What was the mood like? What was the mood like in Pakistan when India and Pakistan were about to go to war? Without using any expletives, yeah? Quite electric, passionate, nationalistic, okay? What was the mood like in India against Pakistan at that time? Same. Everybody was in that euphoric, nationalistic fever. The Indian pilot is captured, right? And there's a lot of tension between the two countries. I want to ask you something. What if in New Delhi there was a march just after the Indian pilot was captured and the plane was shot down, and there was a march in which you had all these guys with the India flag, and you had somebody who went there in the protest and raised up the Pakistan flag, what would happen to him? Not meat, but the vegetarian. They make a samosa chaat out of you. You're finished. Okay, likewise, here in Pakistan, there's a protest going on in Islamabad, and all these nationalistic Pakistani people are there, and somebody goes there and raises up the India flag. What's going to happen? Keema, right? Finished. Done. Killed. Whatever. Human beings, we sociologically conform to our society. We do what other people do, right? You go to a different country, you slowly start acting like them, talking like them, dressing like them. Studies have shown human beings deny their own perceptions to fit with society. There's lots of social experiments to prove this. However, what's interesting is this. The Prophet ﷺ raised the flag of Tawheed in a land of shirk on his own, which is wallahi more difficult than raising the flag of India in Islamabad. Why? Because the Arab society was a society which economically, politically, socially, culturally relied upon shirk. They loved their ancestors and they loved their idols. And they came up to the Prophet and they said, we'll give you money, women, wealth, power, whatever you want to give up your message. What did he say? Okay, I'll give it up. What did he say? He refused. He refused and he maintained La ilaha illallah. Now, anybody who studies criminology, when a crime happens, the first thing people look for is not the murder weapon or witnesses. The first thing people look for is who would have wanted this, the motive. The motive is the key indicator. What's the motive of a man who is being given everything and he says, no, I will not take it. I will not take this. To a man which everything materialistically you can imagine, he is refusing it. And that man for us is a true messenger of Allah based upon his character, because he cannot be a liar. He hasn't got the psychology of that. He cannot be insane because of the product of the Quran and the Sunnah, which clearly cannot be the product of an insane mind. So he has to be speaking the truth. And for us, it is enough of enough knowledge of his character is proof of his prophethood. The prophecies which I spoke about, which are wonderful and great, that's, if you like, an additional argument. And what I'd like to end upon is this. Who in this ummah had the greatest iman? Who had the greatest iman amongst the Sahaba? Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. Why was Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, why was he called that name? What was special about him?
He from the Israel Miraj.
Yes. Anything the Prophet ﷺ came up with, he would accept totally. So when somebody came up to him and said, this is what your Prophet is claiming, that he went up to heaven and he came back and he went to Jerusalem in the same night, what did he say in return? If he said it, it's true. And his name we remember today as Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. Did he know about these prophecies? These were later. So his iman was not based upon that, and our iman neither needs to be based upon this. It's just a side argument. For us, it is enough of his life, his tawheed, his message, which is a message which resonates with the fitrah, which is enough to prove he is the messenger of God. And that's why we will follow the Prophet and not follow Dajjal. Everything good I've said is from Allah, every mistake is from myself. Jazakallah khair for listening.